Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, looking back at 10 years of Cambridge University Press Ebooks, learn why ebooks came to be and how relevant the content remains, which is sponsored by Cambridge University Press. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, the structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you should see a Q&A panel and a chat panel. If you don't, you can click the little arrows beside those to expand and collapse the panels. Please use the Q&A panel to send questions to each of our panelists today. We'll take some time at the end of the presentation to answer as many of your questions as we have time for. So, as I said, please do feel free to send those in throughout. If you have any technical issues, that's what you can use the chat for. You can use that to message me directly, and we'll troubleshoot that issue privately. Let's see, today we're using the hashtag ACRL Choice webinars during the event. So if you've got another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. And also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to that archived version. All right, that's enough out of me. It is my pleasure to turn things over to Don Gallagher of Cambridge University Press.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking some time to attend this webinar. My name is Don Gallagher. I am the Senior Library Sales Representative covering the Southern Territory for Cambridge University Press. And I'm going to talk to you briefly about our book program, specifically our ebooks program, before turning the floor over to my editorial colleagues so they can take a deeper dive into several of the subjects on our list. Book publishing at Cambridge University Press I'm sorry, I'm in charge of the slides now, I'd forgotten, apologies, has been continuously publishing since 1584. We have over 50 offices all over the globe, with the largest academic editorial teams being based in Cambridge and in New York. We publish approximately 1,600 new titles every year across humanities, social sciences, science, technology, and medicine. We have received more than 400 awards and honorable mentions since 2017, including the annual Prose and Choice Awards. And there are nearly 100 ebooks available on Cambridge Core that are authored by Nobel Prize winners. All of our ebooks are DRM free and do come with unlimited users. There are over 40,000 ebooks on Cambridge Core, which is our platform. And our platform development is ongoing, and we do take customer feedback very seriously. We encourage it so we can help improve things on a regular basis. We do have a number of purchasing models, very flexible, including title by title or collections. We also offer frontlist purchasing, which is great because it does provide immediate access to new titles as they're published. We do subject frontlist collections. Our evidence-based acquisitions, or EBAs, are quite popular, and we offer backlist collections by subject and year as well. Moving past slide 3, which there's a problem with, move on to the next slide. This is just giving you an idea of the numbers of titles in our backlist by subject, starting in the left with history being the largest, and that's pretty similar to what you're going to find with the front list as well. Could be some small differences, but you can see it's quite a wide range, and you can see the numbers involved there. And over the last 6 months, we're showing you some of the titles that have been used the most on Cambridge Core. You can see that they're across subject areas from statistics and computer science to language and linguistics, history and political science. The bottom row here, these are actually all titles that are part of our open access monograph program. So those are freely available to everyone. We're extremely proud of that program, and some of these OA titles enjoy some of our highest usage on the platform. And obviously, they're also addressing some of the pressing topics of our day. I would like to introduce our editors. There's going to be 4 editors from Cambridge speaking, and I'm going to give you a brief bio for each of those, and then I'll turn over to our first speaker. We are going to have Cecilia Cancelaro first, talking about our history list. Cecilia is a senior commissioning editor for the U.S. and Latin American history. She's fairly new to Cambridge, starting at the press just 6 months ago, but she does have more than 25 years of experience in the book business, working for both scholarly and trade publishers, including Routledge and Random House. Prior to coming to Cambridge, Cecilia ran her own business where she developed and edited a wide range of books for scholars and also served as a literary agent. Following Cecilia will be Nick Gibbons, our senior commissioning editor, taking us onto a deeper dive into our physics program. Nick has worked on the development and growth of the Cambridge University Press physics book list for nearly 9 years. And during that time, he's been responsible for significant expansion of key parts of the list, particularly in cutting-edge research areas such as network science. Before commencing his career in academic publishing, he completed a PhD in nanophotonics at the University of Cambridge, and he also holds master's degrees in optoelectronics and astronomy and astrophysics. Third, we'll have Anna Whiting, senior commissioning editor, and she will discuss the medicine list. Anna joined the press in 2016 and is responsible for publishing titles in neurology, clinical neuroscience, and will soon be taking responsibility for the obstetrics and gynecology reproductive medicine lists. Anna has worked in the medical publishing field since 2006 and previously worked for Oxford University Press. And last but not least, we will have David Repetto. He will give us an overview of our psychology publishing program. David is executive publisher for psychology at Cambridge University Press, where he has been for 7 years. And previously, he worked in sales and editorial at Pearson for 15 years, followed by a 5-year stint as publisher at Sage Publications. So now I'll hand things over to Cecilia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Okay, so let me get to my first slide. So as Don said, I will give you an overview of the history program. And as the slide that he showed illustrated, history is the largest list in our humanities and social sciences publishing program. We publish approximately 170 history titles per year. There are 5 editors in both the US and the UK developing and commissioning history titles. And the range of books is geographically, chronologically, and thematically broad. We cover the world, basically, the US, Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and we also cover a wide range of thematic areas, including, but not limited to, race and gender, legal history, the history of ideas, the history of science and medicine, environmental history, human rights history, and the list goes on and on. In terms of time, our books range from the ancient to the contemporary period. In terms of the types of books that we publish, each editor develops and acquires reference volumes, books for courses or textbooks, trade books, and scholarly monographs. And I want to take a minute to talk about that fact, because it is somewhat unique. At many presses, editors are tasked with publishing and acquiring one type of book or another. They might just acquire reference books or textbooks or trade books. Some editors might prefer that approach. I love the ability to work across these different categories, but more importantly, I would add, I think it makes our programs in each different subject category and our content in each of these categories much stronger and more cohesive as a result of our acquiring in this way. And I also would like to say that the process by which each of these types of books come to life varies as well, with, for example, reference books and course books often beginning with an editor coming up with a book idea, and then because we've identified a need in the market, and then finding the right person or people to execute it. And monographs often coming to us pretty much intact and then getting refined and revised through a peer review process. So our commissioning activities and what goes into developing and signing a book vary depending on what kind of book it is. Oops, sorry. So I just want to take you through each of the types of books that I just mentioned and give you a few examples of those types of books from the history program. Starting with reference, one of our most well-known reference products, the Cambridge Histories, are also, I think, one of the most trusted in the academic world. The Cambridge Histories brand dates back to 1902. It spans 15 subject areas. There are 469 volumes published, and 410 of those are currently available digitally. 54% of the Cambridge Histories are in the field of history. And 4 of the top 50 digital downloads currently on our Cambridge Core platform are Cambridge Histories. Since all 5 of us on the history team acquire Cambridge Histories in our areas of expertise, you'll see that that results in a broad range of historical subjects covered. And the ones featured on this slide, the Cambridge History of the American Civil War, which is a 3-volume set published in 2019, the Cambridge History of World Violence, which was just published, the Cambridge History of Communism, which was published in 2017, and the 15-volume Cambridge History of China, which was published over a number of years. Just give an example of the scope of some of the history volumes published in that series. Cambridge Histories consist of all original content, and they're meant to be much more than just a synthesis of the field. We also expect that they chart the direction in which these particular fields are headed. We seek out leading scholars to edit and populate them, and often the scholars writing for Cambridge Histories are or become authors of single-authored Cambridge volumes. One such example that's fresh in my mind right now is Leslie Gordon, who is a professor at the University of Alabama, because I just finished editing a chapter of a manuscript that she's publishing with us. She's an author in the 2nd volume of the Cambridge History of the American Civil War, and she is writing a fascinating book for us that examines Civil War regiments that were accused of cowardice. The next category that I will talk about are books for courses or textbooks. Like reference books, the books that we publish for courses are often developed and commissioned to fill a specific need or gap in the market. And with books like this, it's very important once they're published to keep the content up to date. So revisions and new editions are considered every several years. In some instances, a new edition of an older textbook is our first opportunity to offer the content digitally. And that is the case with the 2nd edition of a very successful book for us. And that's Jeffrey Parker's History of Warfare, which is represented in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. The previous edition of Jeffrey Parker's book sold 30,000 print copies since 2005. And we expect that this new updated edition will be embraced enthusiastically digitally and in print. I also want to point out on this slide Mike Gomez's Reversing Sale, which is the 2nd edition of a textbook for us that's been very successful, both digitally and in print. And the author is not only the leading expert of the African diaspora, he also edits a very prestigious book series for us called Studies on the African Diaspora. Our trade books, the trade program at Cambridge as a whole has been growing for the past few years, and history books represent a big part of that program. Our trade books are still based on original and innovative scholarship. They're peer-reviewed, however, they are written with general readers in mind. And additionally, these books are aided by publicity campaigns and support from our key accounts team. Since I have limited time, I'll just talk about one book on this slide. And an interesting story about this book, Female Husbands, A Trans History by Jen Mannion. I was actually the literary agent who sold this book to Cambridge about 2.5 years ago. and then was hired by Cambridge as the history editor in time to see this book be published about a month ago. This is a book, an incredibly original history book based on rigorous scholarship. It tells us the never before told stories of transgender and non-binary people in the US and the UK from the 1740s through 1910. And it is the only history book written in non-binary language. It's received some very wonderful mainstream review attention already. And despite many, many canceled events because of COVID-19, the print and ebook are off to a very strong start, and we hope that continues. We've also commissioned Jen Mannion to edit a Cambridge history of sexuality in the US for us. And you'll notice that more than once now I've mentioned authors on one part of our history list turning up on another, writing or editing a different kind of book. There is a great deal of cross-pollination that results from our desire to maximize the access that we have to leading scholars. We often encourage them to think about how they can deliver their research and expertise in ways that they themselves may not have considered, by editing a reference volume, or perhaps writing a book geared to undergraduate students, or editing a series for us. And this kind of publishing can lead to very marketable content, and it also helps add to the cohesion of the overall history program. My last slide speaks to our monograph publishing program, which on this slide I call our award-winning monograph program. Our history monographs feature incredibly high quality scholarship, as can be seen by the number of awards they receive every year. This slide is one example of that. At the American Historical Association in January, we received 6 of the 21 book prizes awarded, more than any other press. Harvard University Press was received the second most awards with 3. You can see the breadth of the work involved on this slide. A book on race and citizenship rights in the US, a book on Black and Indigenous history in Brazil, a book on medieval Islam, a book on 20th century British history, one on a history of science and medicine in Portugal, and an environmental history of China. So in sum, the history program at Cambridge is not only one of tremendous depth, scope, and breadth, but there's also a strong commitment to quality, cohesiveness, and creativity in terms of content delivery and publishing formats.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Nick Gibbons, and I'll be talking today about the Cambridge Books program in physics. So firstly, I understand that Cambridge has always had a strong reputation as a humanities and social sciences publisher. I want to try and emphasize here in this presentation that Cambridge also has an outstanding STM books portfolio, and Cambridge is one of the most, physics is one of the most prestigious components of this. So to give a brief outline, I would to begin by giving you some background to the physics list and how it came to be, before describing in some more detail the kinds of books that we publish. Next, I want to focus on how we maintain and develop such an extensive list, with some discussion of the editorial decision-making process and why that's so instrumental to our publishing program. And finally, I want to address some of the more exciting opportunities and challenges that we face as we move into an increasingly digital landscape. So Cambridge has been publishing physics books for several decades now, and over this period we have developed an extensive and impressive backlist. Overall, the physics list is of great depth and breadth and is widely considered to be the gold standard in physics books publishing. One of the many things that sets it apart from the list of other publishers is our exceptional collection of authors. Back in the 1970s, we published Stephen Hawking's first book, The Large-Scale Structure of Spacetime, and we've published a total of 6 books by Steven Weinberg, the Nobel laureate often referenced as the preeminent living physicist today. Many other Nobel laureates have written books over the years for Cambridge and continue to do so. We also have the honor of publishing 2 of the top 3 most highly cited physics books of all time. Principles of Optics by Born and Wolf, which you can see here as number 1, and Quantum Computation and Quantum Information by Nielsen and Schwang, which is number 3. So we publish around 60 or more physics books each year, which covers the entire physics research spectrum and research curriculum. So this includes traditional topics such as astronomy and quantum mechanics, which have been around for some time, along with the more modern and cutting-edge topics in research, such as network science, machine learning, and quantum information. In terms of level, we publish from introductory freshmen all the way up to highly specialized monographs for researchers. Now, I mentioned textbooks here, and I think it's important to highlight what we define as a textbook at Cambridge. What we call a textbook, certainly in physics, is a book which instructors are likely to adopt for a specific course as the primary text. This, of course, varies internationally, but in the US, certainly, this primary textbook will be followed closely throughout the course, and most students will require a copy, or at least access to a copy. So we also publish course books which are related, but which are typically at a higher level or on a more specialized topic, and these are traditionally found in additional recommended reading lists rather than adopted as the main text. So all new books published by Cambridge are available digitally, both in Cambridge Core and also in the majority of other digital formats, things like Vital Source, Kindle, or Apple iBooks. And we also offer a hugely extensive digital backlist too. So my next slide is about how we create and maintain a world-class list. So having an excellent physics list in the beginning is one thing, but one of the real challenges, certainly from an editorial perspective, is maintaining and developing this. Fortunately, we're able to build upon our traditional publishing strengths and also leverage our close tie to the university. However, it's also essential that we adapt with the rapidly shifting research landscape in order to identify key emerging topics. Now, this requires editors to have an intimate understanding of physics research and also the connections within it. In terms of commissioning, there's actually a lot more to it than just assessing book proposals that land on our desks. In order to sign up and publish the best books by the top authors, we have to be proactive. And this requires establishing an important topic for a book, developing the concept, and then finding the best person or people to write it. So what this means is that editors are often very closely involved in the initial shaping of projects, and this also helps to ensure the highest quality final product. As a publisher, certainly in physics, one of the key things that sets us apart is that we aim to publish quality over quantity. We may not publish as many books as other publishers, but they are invariably the best books. To give you a clearer idea of how this process works, I want to refer to this flowchart shown here in the slide. This is initiated with the submission of a book proposal, which first goes through rigorous internal assessment by the commissioning editor, and in some cases colleagues in related areas, before being assessed externally by experts in the field. In many cases, substantial revisions are made in response to the feedback at both of these stages. Assuming that there is strong support for the book, it's then discussed in detail at our internal publishing committee meeting before finally being brought forward to the press syndicate for approval. As the press is a charity, we're not controlled by a board like commercial publishers. Instead, our governing body is known as a press syndicate, which is composed of senior academics from the University of Cambridge, and no book is published without their explicit approval. So for those of you who may not know, this can be a very long gestation period, the proposal process itself often taking 1 to 2 years. Publication of the final book can typically be 3 to 5 years after this initial proposal. So basically, it takes time to get things right, and it requires significant editorial input at all stages of the process. So it's pretty clear to everyone that both the research and publishing landscapes are changing rapidly, particularly so in the last 10-15 years. Scientific research has become increasingly cross-disciplinary, meaning that identifying the target market for books is less trivial. In physics, certainly, there's been a clear shift towards more practical and data-oriented applications of physics. This is partly linked to students seeking improved employability after graduation, and also partly reflects the increased importance of technological applications within society. I think what hasn't changed, and I don't expect it will anytime soon, is that students and researchers continue to require authoritative and highly pedagogical resources for the development of their careers. Whether that is an undergraduate student struggling with a certain course, or an early career researcher who needs an accessible resource for expanding the research program, or indeed an experienced instructor looking for a new textbook to use for the course. So we intend to continue publishing such resources to support this important development. So we all know that digital publishing is on the rise, and has been for some time. There are many exciting opportunities here, though, for enhanced and interactive content, such as, for example, interactive simulations and integrated programming exercises, which work particularly well within physics and mathematics. This is something Cambridge has been investing in considerably, and will continue to do so in the future. Cambridge Elements is another example of where Cambridge are innovating with new publishing paradigms. Sadly, I don't have time to go into detail about this programme, but you can find more information about it on Cambridge Core. And in essence, this is a new book series journal hybrid model, which takes the best parts of both formats, presents cutting-edge digital-first content within a focused series on Cambridge Core. So a final and significant development is our forthcoming HE Cambridge Core platform, which will cater for instructors and their students by providing digital access to our growing textbook programme. So to briefly summarise some of the key points I've talked about today, Cambridge offers a world-leading physics books list with a prestigious list of authors. We cover all areas of the physics research spectrum and curriculum. We're actively expanding our textbook programme, which ranges currently from freshman all the way up to advanced graduate level. And I think our aim is ultimately to publish books that last for a whole scientific career, not just for a short period. Whether that's a duration of a student's course or a change in an academic's research focus, we want our books to continue to have value to readers throughout their careers. We have hundreds of outstanding titles on the contract and in production pipeline, all of which will be available digitally and earmarked for innovative enhanced digital functionality. So I'd like to end there and leave you with a small selection of some of the recent highlights from the physics publishing programme. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end. So I'll pass you on to Anna, I think.
Hi there, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the medicine programme here at Cambridge. The global medical book publishing market is worth more than 2.5 billion, so it's a big pool that we're fishing in here. We have quite a lot of big competitors, large commercial publishers such as Elsevier and Springer. So our aim here is to focus on certain key areas in medicine that allows us to make sure that we have exceedingly good quality in those areas. Our goal is to be the leading publisher in clinical brain sciences and mental health and OBGYN. We publish around 75 to 80 new titles a year, and we're aiming to develop this in the next few years to 120 titles. We have aggressive commissioning strategies in each of the areas that we work in, and we've got a lot of interesting stuff in our pipeline. We have a wealth of great titles in our backlist as well, particularly our mental health list, where titles don't age as quickly as in other areas of clinical medicine, so they're still relevant to the readers. What we publish technical and practical books for practitioners and clinicians, cutting-edge books for individual researchers and graduate students, revision aids and exam and board prep titles, multi-volume reference works, academic trade books, and specialised research monographs. We're a market leader in mental health publishing. Our medical books are largely aimed at the clinical professional market, helping healthcare teams give the best possible care. We have titles across our lists aimed at those in residency programs, qualified practicing clinicians, and the wider healthcare team, for example, nurses, psychologists, counsellors. We don't publish across all areas of medicine. We specialise in the ones that I've mentioned. We're a market leader in brain health, particularly in our psychiatry lists, and we work with key opinion leaders both in the US and the UK. Our backlist in psychiatry is particularly strong, as I've mentioned, as is our obstetrics and gynecology list. And in the UK particularly, we work with the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists to make this particularly strong. So I mentioned there our mental health list being particularly strong. In large part, this is due to our relationship with Dr. Stephen Stahl. He is a huge name in the area of psychopharmacology and psychiatry generally in the US. So I think a couple of people earlier have mentioned how the commissioning process goes from proposal through many stages through to contracting the book. In medicine in particular, it's a difficult task for us to engage with people to write books, because for medics, writing books doesn't help them in terms of progressing their career. Writing journal articles does, and that and grant applications takes up a huge amount of their time, not to mention clinical work. When our editors and authors are late with their submissions of their manuscripts, they have really good excuses because they're actually helping people with their health. So when we go to people, we typically look at working with people who are speaking at conferences. We reach key speakers there. We work with key authors that are known to us as well. And a lot of people that we approach to talk to about writing books ask us why they should write a book. Why is it important when people can access so much content via journal access, usually via their institution for free to them? And my answer always is that there is still a real need for the curation of content. Busy clinicians don't have the time to plow through all of the research that's available to form an idea of how that research can influence their practice. What they need is somebody with a keen eye for how to relay that information into something that's palatable for them and that can influence their practice. And we have a number of books, particularly in our backlist, that help synthesize that information really easily for them, particularly Dr. Stephen Stahl and his work in psychiatry and psychopharmacology. He is somebody who we don't actually need to go to with ideas because he has them coming out of his ears. He has been working with us since 1996. He's our biggest seller. Our relationship with him started with his Essential Psychopharmacology book, which is now coming into its 5th edition this year, and it's really gone from strength to strength, most notably with the addition of the Highly Practical Prescriber's Guide, which is going into its 7th edition in November this year, and we'll soon be adding a companion to that in the Child and Adolescent Prescriber's Guide. We have a number of series that we're also working with him on at the moment, and I think one of the things, as well as a Stahl Online, which is an online portal featuring all of the publications that's regularly updated to feature the newest publications, which is available to individuals on a subscription basis. Dr. Stahl is someone who's dedicated his life to improving medical education by producing and disseminating educational information about diseases and their treatment, with a special emphasis on multimedia, the internet, and teaching how to teach. He's got a really colloquial style, and it means that people can really understand easily what is a really, really complex area. In the UK, for our psychiatry list, we work with the Royal College of Psychiatrists, a partnership that started a few years ago now in 2017. And I've got here a couple of the titles that show kind of the breadth of the series that they have. They have a great backlist, many of titles of which are available through our website. There two particular titles that I particularly enjoyed working on was My Mummy and Me, which is a really unusual book for our medical list. As I mentioned, mainly we aim to our books at clinicians and practitioners. This is a book that's aimed at children. It's a kid's book, it's a workbook, but it's intended for use by clinicians, by carers, to work with children, to use it with them when their mum might be experiencing postnatal depression or anxiety in some way, ranging from home care to being in hospital. Another book that, again, was really interesting to work on, and again is very, very different to what we normally do, is Dracula for Doctors, which is a history of Gothic representations of psychiatric mental illness in literature. Really, really interesting. Between those posts are any number of books that are clinically relevant and really, really helpful in helping practitioners to work and do their work well. As a couple of people have mentioned earlier, we're publishing more and more trade titles as well. And in our clinical psychology list, this is a really, really exciting example of a new trade title. The Body Image Book for Girls, Love Yourself and Grow Up Fearless by Charlotte Markey is a book that I'm going to be buying to work with my daughter when the time comes. And it seeks to tackle body dissatisfaction by helping girls aged 9 to 15 to develop and maintain a positive body image. One of the books that I'm going to be, will soon be publishing on my list, the neurology list, is a book, Brain Fables, A Hidden History of Neurodegenerative Diseases and a Blueprint to Conquer Them. This book is by Alberto Espay and Benjamin Stetcher. Benjamin Stetcher is a patient advocate. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at the age of 29. And he and Alberto Espay know one another from Benjamin's work as a patient advocate and through his own foundation. Alberto Espay is a huge name in movement disorders, and he's written for us a number of times, which is why he came to us with this idea that he and Benjamin have been working on to really look at why we approach Parkinson's disease and other movement disorders in that way, in the way that we do, in the sense that most movement disorders are lumped in as one thing, and research and the approach to research is done in such a way that it groups disorders together, when really we should be changing the way that we approach that. So it's a really innovative book. It's relatively short. It's only 179 pages, but it builds on what Dr. Espay has been doing in his clinical books that are all available digitally as well. Next slide that I've got here is the prompt series. So this is a series that I'm currently learning about because I'm going to be working on this list. The prompt list is a series of books that were developed to cover the management of a range of obstetric emergency situations and also fetal monitoring in labour. Over the past 5 years, there's been increasing evidence that prompt training can have a significant impact on improving outcomes for mothers and babies. It's a fully interactive suite of materials with online lectures, drills and workshops, and it's a group of books that are intended to be used by the whole multidisciplinary team in obstetrics and gynecology working with mothers. It's actually helping people to develop what they're doing and to help improve the outcomes for mothers and babies. So it's a really exciting book. So I think that's my last slide. So to sum up, we publish in a few areas, so obstetrics and gynecology, psychiatry, emergency medicine, anesthesia, neurology and clinical neuroscience, clinical psychology and pathology. And we aim to do those areas really well, which is why we don't have a number of books across all areas. We specialize in a few areas. Our backlist is extensive and it's full of a number of great books that really help people influence their practice. So I'll pass over now.
Sure. Hi there. This is David Repetto. I'm the executive publisher for the psychology list at Cambridge, and thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly with you all. Just as a start, an overview of psychology at Cambridge, and again, this is just books. I'm not involved with journals, but we publish about 65 books a year with a plan to increase that to about 90 per year over the next couple of years. About 7 years ago, when I came along on Cambridge made a commitment to try to grow its psych list because we felt like we were sort of small compared to the size of the course area and the research. Our medical team, as Anna just said, publishes psychiatry books geared towards practitioners. So we do overlap with our medical group, people with educational psychology, but we handle the bulk of psychology books for the other fields. We cover all major areas: neuroscience, cognition, clinical, social psych, developmental, applied, right on down the line. Types of books we publish. This isn't anything different from what you heard from my colleagues. We do research monographs, reference books, which I'm going to get to in a minute, primarily handbooks. We do books for professionals, practitioners, textbooks. We're starting to do a lot more textbooks in psychology, ancillary materials for courses, recommended reading, that sort of thing. This is unique among publishers, certainly any place that I've ever worked. Typically, as you know, publishers will focus on one type of book, and then one sort will become profitable for them or more in vogue. Maybe they'll focus more on textbooks and and as a result, abandon reference works. But we make a real effort to make sure that we continue to publish all these different types of books. All right, this is what I was particularly anxious to speak with you about. It's our Cambridge Handbooks in Psychology series. And we created this series specifically for the library market. I'd say about 20 or 25 years ago, well before my time at Cambridge, we published 30 or 40 of these books, and over time we revised maybe 5 or 7 or 8 of them. And about 7 or 8 years ago, we decided to reinvigorate the list and sign a lot of new titles. For whatever reason, there seems to be a pretty high demand in psychology for these handbooks. We do a lot of linguistics handbooks at psychology, but other than that, we don't do very many. As far as our just publishing stats here, we've published 52 of these handbooks since 2011. 36 of those have been as recent as 2017 or sooner, and we have 14 titles that are in development right now. The topics themselves are a very wide variety. I'll just read you off the next 5 publications that are due over the next month or month and a half here. We have the Cambridge Handbook of Evolutionary Perspectives on Human Behavior, Cambridge Handbook on Research Methods in Clinical Psych, Handbook of Personality Disorders, of Applied School Psychology, of Cognitive Aging, of Workplace Affect. So as you can see, there's a real wide variety there. Okay, so what is a Cambridge Handbook? And when you hear the term handbook, it means different things to different people, different things to different publishers. For us, it's a big, broad reference work that's very comprehensive, even though it may be on a niche topic, and it has to have a survey of that area and be the go-to reference work for a researcher or student, but typically an upper level student, a graduate student. So we try to survey a topic, explain why it's important, and then look at all the leading views currently in that area. We revise them. Some topics are more conducive to revisions than others. But when the market asks us to revise it, we see there's a need, we revise maybe every 5 or 7 years. Usually it's not much quicker than that. 7 years would probably be about average. It includes emerging and cutting edge areas. And as I said, it's geared towards the international library market, with some appeal to grad courses. Some grad courses adopt these as textbooks. The content, part of the reason that we decided to breathe new life into this series 7 years ago is it's particularly conducive to a digital format. The content is modular, and it works well if somebody wanted to read, say, 1 or 2 chapters out of a 30-chapter volume. All right, the structure of a handbook. They all look pretty similar. Typically, they're 1 volume, even though we're starting to do some longer ones. We have them some as long as 4 volumes. Typical size is 30 chapters of 10,000 words each. So a book will be about 600 printed pages. Typically, and again, there's some variations, but typically there's 4 or 5 sections. And the early sections will deal with foundational issues and historical material. From there, it'll go into research methods material, and then it will look at all the major topics within the broader area. And usually we end with a look forward, what are the emerging topics, what's coming down the pipeline for researchers. Also very important to note, this is all original material. It's not reprinted. Sometimes there are some things that are called handbooks on the market, or sometimes called readers, that are reprinted material that have previously been printed otherwise. We don't do any of that. All of our authors are experts in particular areas, but they don't reprint material that they have previously published. The idea is for them to take their expertise, primarily from journal article writing, and then write a nice 10,000 word synopsis for the reader. Okay, format and pricing. We do print and electronic versions simultaneously. What we're seeing, even just over the last few years here, is a major trend towards the electronic sales and away from print sales, particularly at libraries. And we do review our pricing regularly. Some of our competitors are commercial publishers. As a nonprofit, our idea is not to maximize our revenues, but rather to make enough money so that we can keep our program going and publish as many books. So we do look at pricing regularly and try to make sure that we can maintain something reasonable, both for our institutional customers and for those customers, those independent customers that want to buy a copy of these books. So that's all I have to say on the matter. I'm happy to talk about this further. I realize there's question and answer after this, but if anybody wants to contact me directly, just Google my name in Cambridge University Press, or Google Psychology Editor in Cambridge University Press, and you'll find my email, and I'm happy to give you more information.
All right. Well, thank you, David. And thank you to each of our presenters today. This is Mark from ACRL in Choice. And I would just encourage folks right now, if you have any questions for any of the editors or for Don, take a second here and drop those into the Q&A. I think we've got a few already in the queue, so we'll take a look at those. Let's see what we've got here. All right, so we've got a question that came in, I think, during Nick's presentation, and Charles asks, Nick's diagram was interesting, but I was unclear whether the complete manuscript undergoes peer review or just the proposals, and do the syndics see the full manuscript or just the proposal? Could you talk a little bit about that, Nick, and what exactly goes into the peer review and what the role of I don't think it's actually called syndics, but the group from Cambridge, what their role is in reviewing each of the manuscripts?
Sure, I can certainly elaborate on that. Sorry if it wasn't clear from the diagram. So it does vary actually, but typically, I mean, Anna touched this earlier, so physics authors generally have to be persuaded to write books. It's not a priority for them. So we don't usually get full manuscripts coming in for review. What we generally expect is quite a detailed proposal, often a couple of sample chapters, and we'll have them reviewed. And then based on the feedback we get, we will offer a contract. So on a very occasional basis, we will sometimes review the entire manuscript when it's completed, when it's submitted. But generally speaking, certainly for more advanced books, specialized books, we wouldn't. In the case of textbooks, that can differ as well. We would like to do something called batch reviewing. So as the manuscript's being written, we will have reviewers take a look at each individual chapter, both to ensure its pedagogical value, also to ensure its accuracy and relevance to the market. And in terms of the answer about the press syndicate, they will generally see paper that we write in support of the proposal, and they will obviously see the proposal itself and the full list of referee reports that we took from external academics. So I hope that answers some of your question anyway.
Yeah, I think so. That helps clarify things, at least for me. Certainly, it makes a lot of sense. Great. So we've got, I think, a question here that really, I think, could maybe go to any of you. Or perhaps could be for Don as well. So we got a question here from Deirdre who asks, how does Cambridge decide what backlist titles will get released electronically? Is there a number for how many people or academic institutions have to ask before it goes up? Or how are those decisions made? Or is that a secret sauce you don't want to reveal?
Maybe I can speak generally, and then if anybody has any specifics. There's not a required number of people requesting it. I think what we strive to do is make as many titles, backlist titles, available as possible electronically. Normally, when we're not able to do so, it involves copyright issues for older titles that have been published sort of before people were expecting ebooks to become a thing. Maybe have any idea about them. But perhaps some of my editorial colleagues, can speak to some specifics in their area. I'm not sure.
I can speak to that a little bit. I think it also has to do sometimes with a little bit of it is demand. I know I've taken on a huge list with a huge backlist, and one of the things I'm doing now is sort of seeing what's on that backlist, and in some cases there are some gems on there that were not digital just because we weren't doing books digitally at the time. So these are books that I'm thinking of sort of reissuing with a new introduction or some new content, and they're definitely candidates to be digital now, and it's just that we haven't really gotten to all of it yet. But some of it definitely has to do with sales. We have to also think there's a market for it now. We're not just going to go put everything out digitally just for the sake of it. So there's a demand question. So we will be taking advice about some of those things. And in one other case that I'll mention, we have this big reference project that's called the Oliver Wendell Holmes Devise. It's the history of the Supreme Court of the United States, and it's a very slow-moving process. But we're about to do a new volume in this project. It's the first one that will be coming out digitally, and none of the other ones ever did. So I am looking to perhaps get funds, a grant, to see if we can bring some of the other ones out digitally because it will be an expensive project, but I think there's definitely a market for it. So I think it's just sort of a matter of thinking in terms of the market and the cost and seeing what is there on the backlist for each of our lists that might have potential for that.
Right. You know, just to add to that, all of our new publications, our front lists, come out with a concurrent digital version of the book. And we have some books that are born digital and some books that are open access. So, you know, for a list like psychology, all of our backlist and deep backlists of popular books have been digitized. And you don't have to worry about new stuff coming out because we'll just be doing it as a matter of course.
Great. Does anybody else want to jump in, weigh in on this? Give folks a moment here. All right, then I think we'll move on to some other questions that came in. So I think this is maybe a question for Anna. One of the books that you featured there, Anna, was My Mummy and Me, and we had a question come in from Jamie, and Jamie asks, is My Mummy and Me a picture book, or is it more of a text than pictures? Could you give us a little more description about that?
It's a workbook, so it's really to be used with a carer and talking to a child. So it's double-page format, and it's largely the text is limited to prompts and how to use the book with the child. So there's a lot of space and a number of really beautiful images that were drawn. And it's largely, so the text will be prompts such as, can you draw a picture of you and your mum, that helps the child work through the experience.
Excellent. That's very helpful. Thank you. Let's see. We've got a few more questions coming in here, and it looks like we have some time. So please do drop your questions into the Q&A box there. Let's see. Let's see. Lots of questions coming in. So we've got a question here from Colin who asks, would you mind recapping your distinction between course books and textbooks? I believe it was Nick who noted this, but perhaps others can mention if this distinction is made in their areas. So do you want to speak to that a bit, Nick, and then maybe we can hear from one or two other folks?
Sure, yeah, I can speak about that. So as I mentioned, generally we call textbooks the kind of books that instructors will use as a primary text. So what that means is that they will generally, certainly in the US, they will follow that book very closely and to the page often, even using the exercises, end of chapter problems for homework exercises. So this means that students really have to have some kind of access to the book. We also publish this kind of course book I mentioned as well, which they are often written as textbooks. And it's funny actually, because academics will often write a book and they consider it a textbook, but we wouldn't necessarily consider it a textbook. It may well be used for a handful of courses worldwide, but not enough to really for us to market it as a textbook, a main primary textbook. And generally speaking, these course books tend to find their way onto recommending reading lists or more advanced kind of graduate courses where you may only have 10 students, for example, and it's just not necessary to have a fixed book for that. So that's the basic summary, at least from the sort of physics and maths perspective.
And, you know, speaking for psychology, it's really exactly the same. I call a textbook the centerpiece book for a course, whereas a course book is recommended reading or one of 2 or 3 resources used for a book. And agree with Nick, it's in the US, there's much more of a demand for those centerpiece types of textbooks. You know, in the UK and Canada and elsewhere, we see courses more typically taught using a bigger variety of resources.
The medicine side of things, it's funny because the words textbook and handbook aren't used in the same way as they're used in different areas of publishing. So they're really kind of used to talk about how big the book is. So a textbook of medicine will be a large multi-contributory reference book that anyone can refer to, and it will be comprehensive. Whereas a handbook in medical publishing is more used to talk about something that's quick reference, practical, handy, small book that somebody could look something up on the ward. That, for example. So it's a bit different, and we don't typically publish books that are aimed at the higher education market.
I would also say that I agree with the definitions. I do think in history, there's some nuance and gray areas because I think people teach history in different ways. So although I don't think we publish some sort of very introductory U.S. history textbooks, I do see that professors sometimes teach introductory history where they don't use a one U.S. history textbook as a primary text for the class, so that in those kinds of classes, we do have books that are used as textbooks. So it's a tricky term sometimes in some of the humanities and social sciences about what is a textbook. So it's always a term that we're sort of grappling with. So I do say that we do publish course books and textbooks, although we don't have a sort of U.S. History 101 textbook that's sort of a big $200 book that is used in some of those kinds of courses. So it's not always such a clear distinction sometimes in the fields that I acquire in any way.
Great. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Let's see. We've got a question here from Charles. And Charles asks, do you see your open access books program expanding? Do you have targets for what portion of the list will be OA each year? Or how is that handled?
Our medical list, it's really led by authors and what they need or want. So funding for open access is largely limited to research in the medical sphere. So it's mainly aimed at those who are publishing data in journals in particular, and who receive funding for their research and how they publish that. So in terms of books, given that we're almost gathering and selecting the content that we're putting in, it's not research-led as much as it is commentating on research. So where we have requests to publish open access, it tends to be from people who have funding or have sourced funding through charitable organizations to make a book more widely available. So for example, we have a book on neurology in Africa, which is open access. We have a book on our psychiatry list called Where There Is No Psychiatrist, which is also open access, and that had funding from a number of different charitable organizations to make it freely available. And I'm currently working on a proposal for a book on working with dementia patients, and that again will be open access. And one of the limiting factors to publishing that was that it was aimed at primary care, and typically primary care practitioners don't buy books, and so the aim is to make it more widely available, and the proposed editor has sought funding to do that.
Right, and in psychology anyway, I would agree with Anna's point as half of our open access project, half is funded from outside organizations, whether it's, a grant or a society or something else. And in that case, it's a finished, proofed book that's posted open access online to anyone. The other side is green open access, which you probably hear a lot about. And the idea there is for authors of research monographs to print their material online that's, in rough draft form, not that finished copy edited form. And we encourage all of our authors to do that. So they post it on their own sites, and the idea is to ensure more transparency in research. And that's growing immensely. A week doesn't go by when I don't have somebody who asks about it.
This is also one of those questions that it really varies depending on the discipline you're working in. So history is not at all publishing as much open access as these other fields, as the hard sciences or even as some of the other social sciences. So I'm involved in a consortium. I'm involved in a consortium of other U.S. scholarly presses where we're doing sort of an open access initiative, sort of testing it out and seeing what's happening. But historians are not being funded in the way that other people are to publish their work in open access form. So it's happening, but it's much slower. And even the open access models are different in the States than they are in Europe right now. So we are doing some open access in history, but it's not at all at the levels that it is in other fields right now. So this is an interesting model to watch and to see how it develops. And I think we're all grappling with it in sort of different ways and figuring it out and how it fits into our models and how we will be fitting into that model even amongst our own business, because we're all at different places in our own business figuring this out. So.
Yeah, I think that's particularly true. And that's often the disparity that gets mentioned when talking about OA books is between the humanities and social sciences and the hard sciences. And OA monograph publishing it's a nut all its own. All right, so looking at the clock, we are at about 3 o'clock Eastern. So I'll take a moment here to say thank you to everyone out there for joining us today. You should see a link to a quick survey. It's 5 or 6 questions to let us know what you thought of the program today. If you could take just a moment or two to fill that out and to respond to us, we would really appreciate that. And I would just like to take a moment to say thank you to each of our presenters today for taking some time out of your, I'm sure, busy schedules and to do one more online meeting to talk with all of us. We really appreciate that. And just one last note that everybody who registered, please note that you should get that email from ACRLN Choice with a link to the recording within about 24 hours. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time, and we hope you'll join us again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.